everyone, my name is Rhiannon from Blue Dog Board Games, and we are finally here. We are at the very end of the solo Uwe Rosenberg series that I've been working on for probably around 18 months now. Today I am going to be ranking all of the games that I have played solo and let you know what my favourites are. For each of these games today, I do have a completely separate video where I do a solo playthrough and I go much more in depth about my thoughts on the solo mode of each of these games. So I will link that down below for you in the description if you did want any more information about the game. There's going to be 10 different games on this list that I'm going to be giving a brief overview of today, and so this video is already going to be long, so if you are interested in any, do absolutely check out those other videos for a more in-depth look. So of course, I'm only looking at 10 different games today, and Uwe Rosenberg has so many more, and I understand that I'm probably not going to be playing maybe your favorite solo Uwe Rosenberg game. And so I wanted to just sort of say that obviously this list is completely, utterly my own opinion, and I've worked quite hard over the last few weeks. I've been very quiet on the channel, but I've been trying to really get a good understanding of where my thoughts lay on all of those individual games. I wanted to really have this video be a definitive ranking for myself and for it to be a useful video for other people. But I deliberately have selected these titles for a number of reasons. I had to be interested somewhat in the theme, or it needed to be very, very accessible for me to get, or I managed to find it for a cheap price. One of those options, or it was one of the most well-known solo games from Uwe Rosenberg. If it didn't really fit into any of those categories, it's probably not going to be on this list today. I'm going to be putting up a screenshot of all of the games that I am going to be ranking today. These are the titles, and you will see that I am very slightly cheating. I have 2 entries for A Feast for Odin. I've got A Feast for Odin, the base game, and A Feast for Odin with the Norwegians expansion pack. Now, just very briefly, I just wanted to address why I have included that twice on the list. And the reason is that I have heard so many people talk about the Norwegians expansion as a must buy. And I am not somebody who likes to buy many expansion packs. I'd much prefer to buy a new game than an expansion typically. And so that interested me, and I wanted to sort of address whether or not I felt that that pushed A Feast for Odin above and beyond for me. I already like A Feast for Odin very much, or whether I thought that A Feast for Odin was substantial in its own right. So I thought that I would make them 2 separate entries, and I am glad I have done so because I do have some thoughts between the two. So that's why there are 2 entries. So technically we're ranking 9 of the games, but 10 because I wanted to segregate those 2. Absolutely though, if you do have other Uwe Rosenberg titles that you love to play solo, absolutely let me know down below in the comments. I want this to be a list that is going to be useful going forward, so newer releases, absolutely pop them down in the comments, or really older titles that you think really shine and don't get a lot of love, put them down as well. I really would love to know your thoughts, and it will be useful for everyone to see what other titles there are that are loved and not necessarily spoken about. The only other thing to address today then is how this video is going to work. I am going to be counting down from my number 10 entry all the way down to my favourite solo game of Uwe Rosenberg's that I have played. And for each of these games I will be giving you a very brief overview of how the game works, how the solo mode works, and what sort of themes are around in it, or mechanisms. I will then be going through a few things I really liked about the game, and also give you a pointer of things that didn't work quite so well for me. So without further ado, we're going to get straight into my number 10 entry. My number 10 entry for my solo Uwe Rosenberg series is going to be Glass Road. Now, before we dive any more into this title, I just want to say that there is a brand new game from Uwe called Black Forest, and I understand, I have not played this one and I haven't read too much into it either, but I understand that it is like a re-implementation in a way of Glass Road. So if anything I'm talking about, or if you've looked at my playthrough of Glass Road and it seems interesting to you and you'd like to know more, make sure you do have a look at Black Forest as well, just to see whether Black Forest may be of more interest to you rather than Glass Road, because they do sort of share a lot of mechanisms from my understanding, and the theme overlaps quite a lot, and I think the solo mode has a bit more attention in Black Forest. So Glass Road is a game that is one of the very few on this list actually today that has a shorter play time, and that may be something that twigs your interest. The solo mode of Glass Road can take about half an hour, so it's very, very easy to just sort of play 2 games back to back, which can be really important to some people. Glass Road is a game where it's set in the 18th century Bavarian forest, where you are focusing on building up your little village area and producing both bricks and glass and trying to earn the most points possible from building structures within your little village area. It's got 2 quite iconic resource wheels, so you're not really going to have too much control of when these wheels rotate and produce the more valuable resources like the bricks and the glass from your basic resources. As soon as your little dials are sort of ticking up, your wheel is just going to keep rotating around unless you deliberately stop yourself gaining those basic resources. So that's quite a key component to this game. Technically, this game is not a worker placement game, so it does set itself apart from Uwe's other titles, but it is in a way. Instead of placing your workers, you've got a deck of cards in your hand, and the solo mode works by you've got 7 rounds across which you are playing, and on each round you have a certain number of cards you can select from. These cards will show you an action that you can do, and it's usually things like gaining resources, spending this X resource to get another different resource, or get some structures and things like that. In the next round, whatever cards that you have chosen in the round before are locked out. Is like a worker placement is sort of staying in that spot and you can't go to that spot again. So, and then they get back into play in the 3rd round and so on and so on. So it sort of blocks you out from your actions a little bit, much like a typical worker placement game, but it is just with cards. Also to say as well that when you are choosing your action cards that you want to play, you shuffle them all together and you draw them one by one. You are technically discarding that last card that you will draw, and you will not do the action, so you're not always going to have full control over what actions you do on your turn. There is an element of luck involved. So the main pros of this game for me were the setup time and the play time. It was quite refreshing to have a game that had little to no setup. You can set it up in literally 5 minutes, under 5 minutes probably. And being a game that you can sort of get out and play in half an hour is quite nice. It felt like a much more accessible game than some of his other titles, and I could play and was often motivated to play 2 games back to back. The setup between the 2 games was just minimal as well. You don't really need to do that much at all. It's very, very easy, and I can imagine that a lot of people would really like that aspect. It also is quite a stripped back and streamlined game from this perspective. There's nothing widely complicated or long-winded about any of the actions that you're doing, so every turn is quite snappy, and therefore you do have quite a lot of time to sort of focus in on your strategy and choosing which structures you want to play to try and get a good score at the end. You have quite a lot of time to focus on your pure strategy rather than worrying about fiddly rules here and there. It can definitely be quite satisfying to see a few components of different structures, so the bonuses that you get linked together. The structures can vary from giving you immediate abilities or immediate resources rather, or abilities to allow you to transform resources from one thing to the other over the course of the game, or endgame scoring potential. So allowing you to just focus in on that aspect is quite satisfying. But of course, this is my number 10 pick, and this didn't tick a lot of boxes for me for a few reasons. The first thing, and I think that this is actually a me problem rather than a game problem, but I think it's just a skill point of view. I'm not particularly skilled. I just think, although the playtime is really nice, it's only half an hour long, that's great. I just feel that it wasn't enough time to sort of get anything running. I always found myself feeling quite unsatisfied at the end of that half an hour, looking at my board, and I haven't really achieved anything. Rare occasions I can find some quick links between buildings and achieve something, but a lot of the time I just feel like I'm sort of point grabbing for the sake of it, and I haven't had that time or the momentum to build up to something really quite interesting. Like I said, I think that is probably just a me problem, and I think I'm just the sort of person that needs a few more rounds to sort of get into the swing of things and to get things really rolling and rank up those points over a period of time, a number of rounds, instead of a really short condensed experience. So ultimately, I think I just wanted a bit more. I wanted a bit more from the game and a bit more substance. I think I wanted to feel quite satisfied and proud of what I'd made or built at the end of the game, and I don't feel like I get that feeling in Glass Road. On top of that, and this is something that can be very easily house ruled in a way, but I don't feel like there is a good enough turnover of buildings that you see in the game. You don't have any sort of like method of discarding them to refresh the ones that are available for you to buy or take. So I feel like you are very much locked into the strategy as to what is there for you. There is a way of drawing a few more, but you can only do that at maximum every other round. So obviously you can house rule that and just discard the end row and to get that bigger turnover, but out the box I felt that was restrictive as well. And finally, I'm just not super keen on the method of using cards as action selection, for the basis that that last card that you are drawing you actually discard and don't actually get to do, and it's then locked out for the following round. So you are at the mercy of luck essentially. And I do find that in a strategy game, in a worker placement style game, resource management game, that luck is not really needed, and I would have preferred it without it. Okay, so moving on to my number 9 pick, and I feel like this one is going to be so controversial because I went into this one myself thinking this was potentially going to be my favourite solo game, probably one of my best ever solo games, but also quite certain I was going to be ranking this really highly, if not the highest spot. This game is called Oranienburger Kanal, and just to say as well that this does have a new printing of this one coming out, just called Kanal rather than Oranienburger Kanal, which is a really good thing because the amount of times I had to try and type Oranienburger into the search engine to try and find this game, it was a nightmare. But the new version called Kanal, I believe, is coming out at some point very soon. If it's not out already, it's coming out soon. I know that some people have got it, but I don't know if that's just reviewers or people that have managed to purchase prototypes, I'm not sure, but this one looks very different to the copy that you'll be seeing in the B-roll today, but it is exactly the same game from what I understand, identical, it's just different graphic design, and it definitely needed that overhaul, let's be honest. It's also worth mentioning that Oranienburger Kanal, and I understand probably Kanal is as well, is solely a 1 to 2 player game, so if you are somebody who is after a solo game and can play with your family, this may not tick your box. Okay, so going into Oranienburger Kanal, this is back to worker placement. It's a worker placement game where you are choosing your workers to gain resources, your wood and your clay and your ore, I think it is, and building structures on your board and also building routes. So you've got paths, you've got canals, you've got railway tracks, and you've got roads. And it's quite clever in that you are only, normally when you build structures, you get that ability pretty much immediately, but the ability on these structures only activates at 2 points during the game. The first is when you fully surround that structure with routes of any type. So you may already have those routes pre-built, and so if you build that structure in the middle of your routes, you can activate it straight away. But you may build those routes later and deliberately delay the activation of that structure. The second time that you may activate that structure is when you have built the second bridge to or from that particular building structure. So you have a lot more sort of control over the strategy of this game. You can very much sort of plan ahead as to when and which structures you want to activate at particular times. The solo mode for Oranienburger Kanal works quite similarly to some of his other titles. You do have a blocking disc that's just going to rotate between the worker placement spots. From memory, I think there's only 7 spots you can go to, and they're very similar. It's just like gain that resource or build a structure or gain a bit of money, that sort of thing. It's very, very simple. And that disc is just going to tick around from round to round, and once it sort of reaches the very end worker placement spot, that's the end of the round, and that's going to trigger the end of the game. And as with, I think, literally every other title on this game, this is a beat your own score. There's no automa to play against, but there is the inclusion in the rulebook of a solo campaign. So the idea is that you can play, I think it's 3 games back to back in order to try and beat a target score. And you sort of, I think you can sort of play through all of the buildings that you have in each deck. You have quite a few decks within the box. So going back to the actual, the triggering of the activation of the structures, that's one of the main things that I do really enjoy about Oranienburger Oranienburger Kanal, It's because normally you don't have that much control over when you trigger things. Usually, sometimes if you're playing against an AI, the AI is going to take that card, so you really need to get that card ASAP, or there's like era shifts, so that card's going to disappear at some point. In this game, you also have that aspect as well. In this solo game, you do have cards that do tick off, they sort of expire. So you do have like a timing aspect there. But you do have, other than that, you have quite a lot of control over when exactly you trigger these things. And that just adds an extra layer of strategy for me. I thought that was really interesting. And I really appreciated how that sort of made this game feel a bit more complex than it actually was, and just built a lot on very simple gameplay mechanics. Of course, I'm not actually the best at that longer term strategy and like in-depth analysis of those sorts of situations, so I never score too highly. And again, I think that may be these longer, like picture when you're trying to picture these long-term turns, like chess, I can imagine is much the same. I've never been good at chess either. I don't think I thrive in that environment, and I'm very much a short-term goal person rather than a longer picture. So this one is very much you would like to sit down and sort of think your turns out, and when you want to trigger this one, when you want to trigger that one. And I think it can be very, very satisfying for people that do play like that. It does feel quite unique to some of his other titles for that reason. And unlike Glass Road, where you don't have too much control over when you turn your resource wheels, as soon as you sort of push your basic resources above the 0 spot, your wheel is just going to be moving. It's like a hopper where you're just feeding the products in, and it's coming out whether you want it to or not. In Oranienburger Kanal, you have complete and utter control over when you move that resource wheel. So you can move it for free once every turn to get some more complex resources, or you can pay money, your kronas, to actually move that wheel as well at any time during your turn, as long as you have enough money. So it is a different feel from Glass Road, but I also quite liked that aspect because it's quite difficult a lot of the time to balance those resources and your money. Money is also used to purchase structures, so it can feel very much like a push and shove, whether you want to use your resources to your money to move that wheel to gain more resources, or if you want to actually save it up for that really expensive building. Really, really good strategy here in this title, and lots of in-depth analysis to go through. However, this is not higher on my list for a few reasons, and I hate to judge it so much on this aspect alone, but it really has affected my enjoyment of the game, and that is the way this looks, its graphical design. It's just overall, I think, very poor. Going into the theme as well, the theme is not my sort of thing, and that's okay. That's something I knew going in, and I was prepared to sort of get over that aspect. But coupling that with the poor graphic design choice and the color palette, it really just took a lot of enjoyment out of the gameplay experience for me. I do not enjoy having this game out in front of me. It's such a shame because when you actually look at the cover, they've got some really interesting artwork. It's quite unique in the way it looks and the way it's drawn. It's like aligned artwork. It looks really, really nice. But they've sort of framed that with the mustard and orange colours, which clash with the blues as well. And they've sort of taken that colour palette through the entirety of the game to make it just really ugly. Exceedingly ugly, and it just clouds any of the nice artwork that you saw in the cover. There's no artwork during the game either. It's all very a picture of the resource, or all of the graphic design in terms of trying to explain to you without words what the structure abilities are. Honestly, like, the overall look just pulls it so much down because it just looks so cheaply made. It looks like they haven't hired any artists, and it just makes me feel quite angry because the gameplay is so good here. The gameplay really is good. The links between all the structures and that quite unique aspect of when you trigger it, and the simplicity of all the turns in which you're taking, that's a good game there. And it's mired so much by the overall look, and I just think that just doesn't gel at all. And then graphic design as well. Going back to this game after a period of time was really tricky. This is like a bilingual copy that I have, so it's English-German copy. And I think that the idea was that they were trying to use symbols and pictures to represent the abilities of the cards so they didn't have to double print the cards. I understand that, but there are some complex things going on here. For example, there's one card which is trying to tell you something like, for every train track that you have at a right angle with another train track, you can do something. So it's something like, then you can exchange 1 ore for 2 money. But as soon as you reach 3 train tracks at right angles, you can exchange 2 ore for 5 money. It's weird and complicated things like that. If you put it in words, of course it's going to make sense. And I will give the game credit here in that it has a very extensive glossary. You have an entire book per deck of cards, which clearly explains to you each and every one of these structures' abilities. That's great. But I was finding that I was having to pick up that book from every single structure that I was basically picking up during that game, even after a couple of plays. And it should be easier to read than that. It should be so much easier. And it was really pulling me out of the experience. I understand Canal has rejigged that aspect. I don't know to what success rate they have done that. I haven't seen it. But all in all, that mix of the poor aesthetics, the aesthetic is not my sort of thing, the poor theme, or the theme that did not interest me. It's an interesting theme, but it's not my cup of tea. And the graphic design and the lack of understanding, the innate understanding I had in what the symbology and the iconography was doing, did not translate to a smooth and exciting gameplay experience. And then finally, I do sort of feel like you are a little bit of a slave to the cards that actually come out during this game. So you have quite a lot of cards in the game, and I have the expansions as well. So there's so many decks of cards. I think it goes up to F. So what's that? A, B, C, D, E, F. I've got 6 decks of cards. But you only are seeing a tiny handful of those per game. And so if they don't link together very well, one of them might focus on canals, one of them might focus on railway tracks. And then if you're like, well, I'm sort of waiting for a second railway track card so I can put that adjacent to it, it might not come out. And I do sometimes feel quite restricted and not necessarily see some really good links to really push those points really high. So I think that is a bit of a factor here that just doesn't sort of push it into the great category for me. All right, so now going into my number 8 solo Uwe game. This one is also a smaller experience. So this one I can play it in about 20 to 30 minutes. So it is even shorter than Glass Road for me. And so quite often I have definitely played at least 2 games back to back, maybe even 3 games. And once again, this one is really simple to sort of reset in between plays. So really, really nice for a game that if you are looking for a game that is just going to be a bit more of a compact experience. So this game is Nusfjord, and this is a different take on the farming genre. This one focuses on fish farming. So instead of growing crops, you are actually fishing, enhancing your haul of fish, building boats, and also building structures in your village to build up the best fishing village that you can. The solo mode of this game works quite similarly to A Feast for Odin, where you are having 2 different coloured workers, or you can even make it even harder for yourself by having 3 different coloured workers, and you're going to be worker placing. It's a worker placement game. You're going to be placing your workers out and you're leaving those in place for the next round, so they are blocking those spots, and even the spots after that if you want to make it really difficult. So as described, this is a worker placement game, but it also has like a few additional mechanics here where you have fish that you are sort of generating and using as a currency in this game alongside wood to purchase structures to build into your village and gain different abilities. There is quite an interesting sort of flow to this game where the first thing you do during a round is I think it's called the fishing phase. So you are generating fish according to how many boats you have sent out. You might catch 8, for example. You're then going to be feeding the villagers that you may have attracted to or invited round to sit at your table. And these guys can help you trigger certain abilities during the game. You are going to also be issuing fish to your shareholders, whether they are your own shares that you have purchased yourself or shares that you have issued and not bought yourself. So you are not necessarily sort of gaining all of your haul. You have to share it all out and manage your haul of fish. You have got a maximum that you can also have in your inventory at one time. So some of it may go into a warehouse which you can get back later, but you also need to sort of manage that aspect as well. The overall crux of the game, though, does come down to the buildings. Some of these may give you one-time abilities or endgame scoring abilities, or as other titles, ongoing like actions you can take. And this is where your main points are going to be coming from at the end of the game. The main strength of Nusfjord, of course, like Glass Road, does come from the fact that this one is so easy to set up, so easy to sort of play back to back. It's very, very quick, and your turns are very quick and simple to implement, that it is just quite a snappy and rewarding game from that perspective. Also, I think this one is actually so much better than Glass Road in that its replayability is, I think, really high. I think there's always something that's really interesting to do. There's lots and lots of buildings out in front of you in the beginning of the game, and I think this one's done a really good job of actually narrowing the focus a little bit, and so you're only sort of focusing on two resources, which are mainly your wood and your fish. And if you have like a way of sort of bouncing them off each other, you can get a really interesting engine going. So I think that the replayability of this one is really good in that those buildings are just interesting. There's lots of them to see. There's a good turnover of them as well. And also you can play at least 2 games back to back with the same deck of cards of the buildings that you're seeing without seeing the same things twice. And in the normal sized box, you've also got the Nusfjord big box, which has just come out, which I have not played with, so I'm not entirely certain what that includes and what it does. But if you're buying the old school Nusfjord box, you have 3 decks of cards. So that's, if you're playing with all 3 of those decks, you could play 6 games back to back without seeing the same cards twice, which is a really good amount of replayability in my opinion. And it just makes the gameplay feel quite addicting, seeing all of those interlinking strategies sort of be implemented and take place. Unlike Oranienburger Kanal, I definitely don't feel restricted by the strategy from the cards that are out on my turn. I think there's always something good to do. I definitely feel like this title just maybe had a little bit more focus on the solo mode as to some other titles. Sometimes I feel like the solo mode is a little bit tacked on, whereas in Nusfjord I don't necessarily feel that. You've got the implemented 1 or 2 player colours that you can play against to block your worker placement spots, but as well they've designed like a little mini campaign to sort of play through, which is quite nice, and it just sort of amplifies that even further. However, of course, this is not super high on my list for a couple of reasons, and once again I think I just need a little bit extra time to sort of get going in a lot of strategy games. And so although the play time is something that's really quite refreshing when it comes to a worker placement game like this, and I can imagine appeals to quite a lot of people, I think, once again, I do feel just very slightly underwhelmed at the end of the game, and I much prefer the feeling of, after slogging through a whole hour, seeing double the amount of buildings that I built, and I just feel a little bit more satisfied at the end of that experience as compared to what I've managed to build in Nusfjord. Once again, that's probably a player issue, my own skill. I'm also not quite convinced over the mechanisms of the elders. So the elders work by you literally just place your worker out and you can invite them back to your banquet table, and during the game you can serve fish along this banquet table, and the fish stays there until you want to activate an elder. So you can activate an elder once you've gained him already, as long as there's fish available, and they can do things like allow you to build a structure or remove some forests, or I'm trying to think, or do something like help build up your boating fleet, things like that. And I don't know whether it's just in the solo mode and whether these will feel a bit more powerful in multiplayer games, but I just feel like a lot of the time the elders are not super important. And so I feel like I can go a lot of the games mostly ignoring them, because they don't give you points at the end of the game necessarily. And so I just feel like that is an aspect of the game that is quite easy to ignore and that I don't explore. And because this is quite a small narrow focused game anyway. I feel like maybe it just doesn't quite push that aspect enough for me from a solo point of view. I don't feel like their powers are powerful enough to really get the game moving when you're focusing on the elders. And so there's definitely one or two that I sort of favour sometimes, if I feel like I should go for them, and so I sort of neglect the other ones. And there's always games that I sort of come across that I definitely neglect some actions over others, and I always feel like that's a bit of a shame and is a bit of a design flaw. So overall, this game is a very, very good one, and it is a particularly good one solo, I think, as well. It is a much stronger game than, say, Glass Road, in my opinion, but the theme for this one as well is a little less interesting than normal land farming for me, and overall I just think that I prefer the longer strategy games where I can just build up a little bit more over time. All right, number 7 on the list. And once again, I think that this one is going to be a little bit of a controversial pick as well. And there's going to be 2 games here that I think are sort of crossing over in terms of one person loves this one, the other person loves this one. Number 7 for me is Caverna. I prefer Agricola solo to Caverna, and I will sort of tell you why now. So I don't think you can really explain Caverna too well without first going into Agricola. So we'll maybe skip that bit when we get to Agricola. Spoilers! Agricola is further up the list. But Agricola is a game where you are building up your farmstead. You are gaining farm animals to breed. You are harvesting crops, planting crops, harvesting crops. You are building up pastures for your animals, and you are also developing your little farmhouse and upgrading it, basically. And all your points at the end of the game are going to come from whether you've got more workers, because you can breed your humans or dwarves in Caverna to get more workers, and your crops and your animals. All of that is going to get you points at the end of the game. Caverna is basically the same game, but pushes things even further. So you've got not only your farmstead portion where you are going to be gaining farm animals and your crops and all of that, but you've also got a second section where you are living in caves. That is your farm, basically. You can expand that and excavate that out, and also gain buildings to put in your excavated caverns, which give you certain abilities or endgame scoring bits and pieces. There's more of everything in this game. So it's like Agricola on steroids. You have more farm animals as well. You have an additional aspect of this game as well, where your dwarves are going out on expeditions. They can mine ore, which they can turn to weapons, and they go out on expeditions to gain resources, basically. So both Agricola and Caverna are worker placement games. The solo mode works by to speak about Agricola separately, because Caverna works very slightly differently in that you have the same board for like lower player counts, and you have basically places that you are blocking off. You can never go there in a solo game. Caverna overall as well is just generally a little bit friendlier when it comes to feeding your people. So both of these games have an aspect of you need to feed your workers, and Caverna is a little bit friendlier in that regard, where you have more flexibility in order to do that. Both of these titles are of course like a beat your own score variant. So what I absolutely love about Caverna is the widespread nature of this game and how sandboxy it feels. It feels like you can literally focus on any sort of aspect and really run with it and really get a lot of points, and there's just so many choices on your turn about what you want to do, and I just love that ability to choose. It's like an open world adventure game, like a video game to me. I love that first second where you are let loose and you can go anywhere. You have that freedom, and I love that, and this game feels like that to me. You are let loose and you can go excavating, you can go and farm some sheep, you can go and farm some pigs, you can get some crops going. Like, there's so many things to do, and I just love that aspect. Some of my favorite things of this game is what is ignored in Agricola. You don't actually have this aspect, and it is the weapons and the expeditions. I really, really enjoy trying to push that aspect. I enjoy trying to beef up my dwarves with their weaponry or get all of that ore going. And the expeditions, you don't technically do anything interesting with them, but it just allows you to sort of trade goods or obtain goods, not trade them. So for example, you'll be going to a worker placement spot and it will say you can do this, 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 and then also you go on an expedition of strength 2. So that means that you can basically choose 2 options according to your weapon strength on this list of materials that you can get. So that may allow you to sometimes like build a structure that you have available to you, or it may be something as simple as gain a pumpkin, or it's something very simple, but it just allows greater flexibility, allows you another way to get materials or do actions. And I really like that. I think that's a really satisfying aspect of the game. It also, as discussed, just feels a lot more friendlier and open and free than Agricola does. It feels a little less stressful. Sometimes I can feel quite stressed in Agricola, especially when you realize that your strategy is sort of taking you away from being able to gain lots of food. Caverna, I never feel like you have to really focus on food. There's almost always something you can do on your turn to allow you to get enough food. And so I feel like that this one just sort of opens the world up and pushes strategy over getting hung up on technicalities that you may have just slightly neglected, like your food. So I feel like I'm sort of beefing this one up quite a lot, but it is a reason, a number 7 for a reason. And that I just feel like this is very much a tacked on solo mode. And I just think that it's such a shame. It could have been so much more. The solo mode is essentially the same game that you're going to be playing each and every time. All of the buildings are always going to be available to you, so it's not like you have different buildings that you will see from game to game. You also have no variability in the action selection, so all of your worker placement spots are going to be available at all times, every single round for you. So essentially you were just playing exactly the same game every single time. And for somebody who, like me, who can get caught up in certain strategies, certain ways to play the game, you will at some point just get bored of playing that same game. You will get into the same routine and never have any way to push you beyond that routine. There's never going to be a switch up where you are forced to do something else and figure something else out in the game. Nothing encourages you down different routes to expand your gameplay. And I feel like that's basically a me problem, but there's definitely games that sort of handle that better and encourage you to explore different aspects in some way or another, and this one does nothing for you in that regard. And also, just from a solo perspective, when you compare it to something like Agricola, the setup and teardown of this one is just insane. It is a huge game. There is so much stuff you have to bring out. There's so many buildings that you have to get out, and there's so many resources. I don't physically own enough pots to put all of the resources and animals and crops in, so I have to start using all my dice trays. And when you just sort of consider, you know, it's a 45-minute to a 60-minute game, you're playing by yourself, it's not one that you're going to want to play 10 times back to back. It is a lot to go through to set it up and tear it down. And I don't feel like when you compare it to Agricola, I feel that I get the same satisfaction from Agricola as I do Caverna. And when you put that additional setup and table space that you need on top of that, it just doesn't push it above Agricola for me. And also, this is much more expensive to purchase than Agricola, and I think that's because there is so many more components. But if you're just looking to purchase it from a solo perspective, literally half of the stuff is going to remain in the box for Caverna. Half of it, it goes up to 7 players, and so you're going to have 6 player boards and additional bits and pieces just lying in the box, never to be touched. And you don't get that in Agricola, and so I think for so many reasons they're both really great games, but Agricola takes the biscuit for me. All right, so we're at number 6 now. So number 6, you would have thought it would maybe Agricola, but it is not. Number 6 is Fields of Arle. So first and foremost, Fields of Arle is a solo and 2-player only game. So once again, this is not going to be a title that you want to pick up if you are after one to play with like a bigger family. This is just solely 2-player and 1-player only. And of course, once again, this is a worker placement game, and this one has a big board that you're going to be is splitting right down the middle. You've got your spring, summer actions, and you've got your autumn, winter actions, and you can only place your workers in whatever season you're in. Now, in a multiplayer game, you do have the opportunity to place one of your workers, somebody has the opportunity to place one of their workers in the opposite season, allowing you to do those actions because they do differ in terms of what you can do. But in the solo mode, you cannot do that. And that is one of the things that I don't like about this game. I do feel like the solo mode restricts you unnecessarily there. This game focuses very much on a typical farm situation, so you are going to be actually managing your land. You're going to be draining your peat moors, cutting peat from these, pushing back like dikes to sort of drain your land a little bit more. Gain farm animals, breed those animals. You can harvest crops from your fields as well as building structures, as usual. Lots of themes of this in Uwe's games. To get points at the end of the game or abilities that you can do. One of the unique aspects of this game, though, is the ability to have horses and build carts in order to take your goods to markets to sort of trade them out or process them into bigger and better things. So, for example, you can take leather goods or your leather to market to be processed into leather goods like clothing and things like that come back to you, and you can use those to either trade for food later on or even just stay as end game scoring bits. This is a beat your own score game, and the solo mode works by simply placing your workers one after the other. You don't have anything blocking your spaces. You just don't have that ability to go into the opposite season to open up that gameplay a little bit more. So funnily enough, when I played this it was one of the early playthroughs that I did, and I actually didn't enjoy it too much. I liked it, but I didn't enjoy it too much. And this one, going back to it again, I'm glad I have replayed it because I do appreciate this one a little bit more and have enjoyed it, the plays of it this time around a lot more than I did. And one of the favourite things for me about this game is the ability to build those carts up, those carts with your horses or your ploughs that you might have with your cows, and your ability to take goods that you have produced or grown, take them to market. And I think that's really, really cool. You have this track up the side of your board, and basically you can choose in a round what goods you want to take to market, put them in your cart. At the end of that round, you can take them all back, but sometimes you can actually trade those goods for food. And you have whatever, I'm explaining this really poorly, but whatever town or village you have chosen to trade those goods in at, you have tiles that you can flip over, and it looks like a path now. So it's like a travel path. You are traveling to these areas, and I'm not even sure how to describe it. Basically, you just have this path that you can grow up the side of your board, allowing you to get more food as well throughout the game. And I really, really like that. All of those sorts of things just feel a little bit different. You haven't seen that in any other of Uwe's games. And your carts at the end of the game aren't going to be worth too many points. They are worth points, but they're not sort of super, super valuable. So it is very much a sort of give and take of these carts are going to be so valuable in the game to sort of process all these materials to get you lots of points, but at the same time, you don't want to sort of go too cart heavy because it is quite expensive to sort of build these carts in the first place. It takes not only a lot of wood, but also your livestock. Really, really interesting decisions to be made here. However, this one isn't higher on my list because, and I feel like it is a shame, especially as this one is a up to 2-player only. I feel like the solo mode could have been pushed a lot more. I do feel like this solo mode is just quite limited and a bit lacking. So not only are you locked out of the ability to be able to go to the opposite season to gain those actions, and sometimes that can be very frustrating when you just need wood again. You're desperate for wood and you've already utilized all the wood slots on your other side of the board. You can't go and get more from winter. And that's very frustrating. But the main thing for me is the lack of replayability. So you do have buildings that you can build. That the whole game is not solely focused on buildings, not like some of the other titles on this list, but they are certainly important. And there are only a really, really small amount of these buildings that are like interchangeable from game to game. So I think there's, for example, like 3 orange ones that you'll see. It's not orange, I'm not sure what color it is. Blue? Might be blue. 3 blue ones that you see in a game. and you've only got 3 extras out of the game to sort of switch in. So you can sort of play 2 games back to back and see different blue buildings, but all of your red ones stay the same, most of your yellow and orange ones stay the same. So I just feel like actually that you are playing mostly the same game again and again, with a slight variation from each time. And when you're looking at like games with decks of cards, like Oranienburger Kanal, you've got so many cards there, so many combinations. Nusfjord has so many combinations of structures you can build. And this one just doesn't have that variability, that replayability there. There's just no variation from game to game, and I just find that really weird. And much like Caverna as well, there's nothing here to sort of persuade you into trying different things in the game at all. So I definitely find myself going down very similar tactics. I definitely have my favourite buildings that I like to build, and I very rarely ever venture very far from that path. For example, there's spaces where you can butcher your animals for leather. And I'm a vegetarian, so I'm not too keen on going to that space, even though it's a board game. I'm able to sort of segregate the two, but it's still not my favourite thing to even entertain in my head for just the overall thing. And so I just automatically steer away from all of those aspects that need a lot of leather, or sort of focus on that aspect of the game. And I actually would rather the game encourage me to sort of try that one time and see if I can make that strategy work. But I just don't have the drive to do that. I never find myself falling into that desire to do it, because there's nothing encouraging me down that way. You can just very much, as usual, come trapped in your usual gameplay style. And I think this day and age that there's just no need for that. And I just feel like there's plenty of other games on this list as well that do encourage you to sort of try new and different things, or even force you to try new and different things because your usual strategy is not working. But this one is just very sandboxy and allows you to do whatever you want. But that's either a really good thing for you or a really not good thing for you. And for me, that's not necessarily a great thing for me. All right, halfway through, my number 5 pick. So this is where Agricola is going to enter the list, and I don't want to focus too much on this one because I have already given an overview of Agricola in the Caverna further up the list. But just very briefly, I do find that this is just a much tighter experience than Caverna and is a much more stripped back, pure farming game. And the main thing that I really like about Agricola is the replayability, which is just something that is missing for me from Caverna. In Agricola, you have a hand, I think it's of 14 cards. I think it's 14. You've got 7 of one type and 7 of another. It's like things that you can build and careers or something like that. I can't remember. But anyway, you have cards basically, and there's quite a lot of variability in these cards, and they can definitely help shape your gameplay. I find like it's a really nice balance that your whole game isn't focused on these cards necessarily. I found that I can still get really good scores in this game by half ignoring the cards, but also sometimes I switch around and find some really, really nice strategy within these cards I can play, and really just pushes my game even further. And the fact that you can have that in a worker placement game and work so well just means that from game to game you are seeing new and different strategies every time, and it just keeps things feeling really fresh. On top of that as well, Agricola actually has a nice way of switching up your worker placement spots. It is just a normal worker placement game. You only have some very minor tweaks to the solo rules in that you just have, I think it's 1 less wood that's being generated each turn, so you're not overflowing with wood. But you actually have your cards sort of shuffled together, so your cards are your worker placement spots and they get flipped from round to round, so your board or your choices of where you go actually expand as the game goes on. In Caverna, they're all static, and this one you may not see sheep farming, for example, until round 3, whereas the next game it might be in round 1 that you see it, or something like that. So it's very minor changes, but it helps to keep the game feeling interesting, and it definitely can affect the way you play quite heavily. And you have even like a reference of what cards are in what era. It's like what year or something like that. So you know that sheep farming is going to come up either this round or next round for certain, but you just don't quite know when. And I really like that slight uncertainty. It is pushes into the more luck category, but you have to just work that into your strategy a little bit. And that's just definitely where Caverna was just off the mark a little bit. There's also an additional aspect of the solo mode in this game where they have designed like a sort of mini campaign again. It's all, not campaign as you'd see in these massive Kickstarters, but a little campaign where you can essentially, from game to game, I think it's like 7 games you can play back to back. But essentially you can choose, I believe it's like 1 card that you've played during that game to take into your next game, and the target score you need to beat keeps increasing. So in the second game onwards, you can keep 2 cards and take that into the third game. In the third game, you can keep 3 cards. And it becomes really interesting as to what cards you want to try and keep. See if you can try and get like a little engine going from those cards. And it becomes really, really tough as you go through, trying to keep pushing all of those scores higher and higher and higher. I think I've managed to get to game 5 out of 7 before I died. I didn't get the target score, but I really, really enjoyed that aspect. It just feels like this one, and it's a very loved title and it's been reprinted many times, so I understand that this is the solo mode has probably had a lot more attention to it than some of the other titles here, but it just feels like this one has been thought about a lot more from a solo player's point of view and is really appreciated and has come through really well. The one thing to say about Agricola, though, is it is definitely a more stressful game. It is one that you do have to feed your workers in the game, so you absolutely cannot ignore that aspect. It's going to be detrimental to you if you cannot feed them, and you don't have as much flexibility in your gameplay to do that with like animals and crops and all of that you may do in Caverna. So if you are somebody who is maybe playing with like younger or less experienced players and you don't want them to feel out of place or joint their nose out of joint or whatever the saying is, maybe go with Caverna. But I think Agricola is the better game overall, but it is just more stressful and you do have to scrabble around for food on some rounds more than you would otherwise want to do. So it definitely shapes your gameplay. Okay, now on number 4, and I'm quite reluctant to actually say this one over some other titles here, because I think this one is going to be a little bit controversial, but my number 4 pick is A Feast for Odin with the Norwegians expansion. So not the base game alone, with the expansion. So I'll go over A Feast for Odin in its entirety because the expansion adds to it and enhances gameplay a lot. So that they're not like totally different games or anything, but A Feast for Odin is a huge title, very well known and loved from the solo gaming community, a worker placement game, and this has many different mechanisms in it as well. This is a game where you are a Viking clan. You are working to gain resources, to build boats, to go out exploring new lands, to gain more treasures, to go pillaging and hunting, to gain food, go like serve all your Vikings these feasts. There's a lot here. There is so much to do. And when you just look at it on the board, it can look extremely overwhelming because I think there's something like 50, 60 action spaces to go to. In reality, you do sort of see that they are all very similar, or they're clumped together really well, so it becomes a lot friendlier when you get to know the game, but it is exceedingly overwhelming from the off. As well as this typical worker placement style game, you do have an additional aspect which is like the polyomino puzzle aspect. So you gain resources during this game which are all tiles, so it can be things like goods or foods, and you have to carefully place these on your player board or additional player boards that you get where you've explored new lands, for example, or you've built sheds or longhouses. You need to put all of these aspects out, as well as peat or money, into these areas, covering up negative points that will be counted at the end of the game, and hopefully gain you bonuses in terms of resources if you surround these areas with your tiles, or even increase your income. I love the addition of that aspect. I think that pushes the puzzle aspect of this game above and beyond anything else on this list, pretty much. The solo mode in this game works by you controlling 2 different coloured meeples. So you're going to be placing your meeples out as normal on round 1, and then round 2 you're going to be controlling a different colour. And be blocked by your first player colour, and only in the third round take back the colour that you used in the first round. So you're always going to have a little bit of competition and be forced to go change your mind sometimes according to what you wanted to do originally. So the Norwegians expansion adds some content, but also sort of streamlines and improves some content in the base game. For example, it does offer an additional 4 exploration tiles that you can go out. So these are places that you can go and explore with your Vikings and gain the tile of that area. And in that tile, you can fill it with food items or treasures and things like that to either gain you more income or bonuses. It also scores you points at the end of the game. It also has the addition of pigs. In the base game, you have, sheep and cattle that you can breed, but the expansion also brings in pigs, which have an additional rule that they can breed every single round instead of every other round that the other livestock do in the base game. The board has also been sort of reformatted, so some of the action spaces are completely different. Some of them have been sort of merged or altered in a way. I think you also have a division between your 1 to 2 player count game and your 3 to 4 player count game, which you don't in the base game. But also there's an additional column as well, which sort of allows you to have better flexibility of using 1 or 2 Vikings. But the game overall as well has an element of making cards, the occupation cards in the base game, a bit more useful. So in the base game, you sort of draw these cards and are sort of stuck with them. If you don't want to play them or don't have anything you want to play, you sort of just play it and get the points. Whereas in the Norwegians expansion, you do have the ability to sort of discard them for points, or that it seems it just a little bit easier to get them going and make them feel a little bit more useful. But other than that, the Norwegians and A Feast for Odin play exactly the same. It just adds some stuff. It alters some of the navigate the exploration tiles in the base game as well. I say alters, it had like a tiny change in it, so they're basically the same, but it adds some 4 extra ones as well. Basically the same game with better quality of life features. So then just going into overall why I think that the A Feast for Odin with the Norwegians expansion is going to be lower on my list than the base game. When I was creating this list, I was trying to think about a number of factors that would range everything from setup and teardown time from a solo point of view, like player, area, space, money, how expensive the game is, how much fun the game was to play solo, how much replayability it had. For me, A Feast for Odin was always a really strong game. What I've already said, what I love most about it is that polyomino aspect. Being able to build up and increase your income versus do you actually save those tiles to sort of push for those bonuses? Do you not go for your home board and actually explore loads and try and surround all of the extras and goodies on those boards instead? It's a real sandbox experience, and I absolutely love the freedom that this game gives you to explore each and every one of those strategies. So naturally, both the base game and the Norwegians expansion was going to be quite high on my list, but ultimately, when you include the Norwegians expansion in this, it had to be ranked lower because of a number of the things that I was looking for. There's a lot of components in A Feast for Odin. It takes up a lot of space on your table, and when you factor in the Norwegians expansion on top of that, you are needing even more space, and it takes even more time to set up, and it can just feel quite exhausting. And you know, bending over this way and everywhere to get everything accessible. Not only that, A Feast for Odin is, I'm just trying to think, is it the most expensive game on this list? I think it must be. I think it's at least ranking in tied first place for the most expensive game on this list. I think I purchased my copy for £70, brand new. And so the Norwegians expansion on top of that is going to be at least £30. You're spending £100 here on a worker placement game. It's a very good worker placement game and a really, I think, a fantastic one for a solo player. But I'm just trying to think, is that £30? Am I getting £30 extra enjoyment from this game that I would not otherwise have in the base game? And I think the answer is no. What I really do like in the Norwegians expansion is the fact that it does make those occupation cards feel a lot more useful. I actually enjoy quite a few of the additions, so the extra tiles that you get in the game. They're interesting shapes to sort of play around with on your polyomino and the polyomino aspect of the game. So that's quite nice. And I like pigs because they breed every round and it feels just quite a nice turnover to have. That's really cool. But I do feel like the Norwegians expansion did try to fix a few problems of the base game that I've heard people talk about. And I have never felt that as a solo player, that anything needed fixing. I understand that one of the exploration tiles in the base game was always regarded as really powerful because it had a high income potential. I didn't really see that was fixed in the Norwegians expansion. It just sort of expanded on the number of options that you have. But as a solo player, I definitely didn't ever feel left out by somebody else nicking that tile. I'm always just trying to beat my own score. So I felt like a lot of the aspects that it was addressing weren't necessarily directed towards the solo player's perspective. So although I really enjoy the new rules and the enhanced replayability of this one that this one gives, it's got a lot of replayability anyway, I just could not justify the additional £30 that I would be spending on an already expensive game to sort of push it above the base game for me when considering the whole package. Okay, so naturally we'll go into my number 3 entry, and that is going to be A Face for Odin, the base game. Surprisingly, there's 2 games I actually prefer solo. But yes, as already discussed with the Norwegians expansion, A Feast for Odin is a really, really fabulous solo experience. I never feel restricted as to what I want to do on my turn. It doesn't necessarily always encourage you to try different things, but for some reason in this game I do try different things sometimes. I think it might be because of the occupation cards. Sometimes some of the action spaces definitely encourage you to or that you want to go to do allow you to play occupation cards, so you automatically are wanting to use them. And so sometimes I do try and lean into that and always try and focus, well, I've got this card, I may as well focus on that aspect of the game and play it like that. So I just feel like ultimately this is just a huge playground for me. I love the multi-layered strategy as well, with the worker placement and the resource management and the polyomino puzzle. Really, really nifty little game. Huge game, not little. Alright, so we are down to my final 2 games. Now, if you have been following along with my solo Uwe Rosenberg series, you will know in the next 30 seconds as to what my number 1 is. But anyway, my number 2 pick of my solo games is Hallertau. And this one came as quite a surprise to me because I see it for sale quite a lot. And I managed to pick this one up for an absolute bargain price of about £25, brand new. And so I didn't really have many hopes for it. I've heard people talk about it before and think, yeah, it's a good game. But £25 for a big box strategy game of a well-known designer, I was just like, it's gonna be a bit naff, isn't it? But I'll give it a go and put it on this list anyway. But I was very, very surprised by how much I like this one. I think this one feels quite unique to his other titles. So once again, this is a worker placement game, but this one is set in Germany and you are going to be hop farming instead of focusing too much on livestock farming. You do have an element of it, but it is hop farming and sheep farming and developing your community center. It is a worker placement game, but this one has a slightly different aspect in that you don't necessarily lock yourself out of that action. You have complete freedom of where you go on your turn with your workers, but it becomes progressively more expensive to go to that spot if there's other workers already there. So there's going to be at least, I think there's always 3 action spaces at each worker placement spot. The first time you go there is 1 worker, second time is 2 workers, 3 workers is your third time. So as long as you've got workers, you can go and do whatever you want. And I really like the fact that that opens up the game to me. The solo mode in this game works pretty much identically to the multiplayer game. You are just going to be placing your workers one by one, doing whatever you want to do. And at the end of that round, or is it the beginning of the next round, you are basically drawing a card and it will tell you where on the board you're going to be removing some workers from, just so the game doesn't get too cluttered. But other than that, it works exactly the same. And of course, it is a beat your own score variant. It does have like a target score that you are trying to get to as a solo player, which I find really, really tricky to get to. I'm obviously not very good at this game either, but it is quite a challenge to try and beat that score. There are a number of unique aspects to this game, therefore, that I think just sort of pushes this one as quite a unique title and keeps me quite intrigued and excited when it comes to viewing all of these games as a whole, and just sort of stands out a little bit more. The first aspect for me is the addition of the community centre for me. So it feels a little bit like Stardew Valley, and I love Stardew Valley, but the community centre essentially is representing how many points you're going to get at the end of the game according to how far you push this community centre along, but also it shows you how many workers you've got access to on your turn. So the more you push it along, the more points you'll get at the end of the game and the more workers you'll have on the next round. The way that you push this community centre along is by pushing these little processing buildings along these tracks. So, and they all need resources to do so. So this is just off the top of my head, but the bakery may need bricks and wheat in order to move along. And from round to round, the cost of moving all of these buildings will sort of alter. So in round one, you'll need one good of any of these listed types to move these buildings along. So for example, you might spend one brick to move this building along. But the criteria of all these buildings is quite specific. So the bakery may always require you to use more bricks than wheat. So it's always a little bit of a puzzle into balancing all of your resources. You can't focus just on one strategy in this game. You really have to diversify yourself and ensure that you have enough of everything, basically, in order to push all these buildings along as far as possible. And on top of that as well, you have little rocks that you have to sort of dig out. You need to make sure that you've got enough leftover workers to trade for tools to push these rocks along, to allow you to push these buildings along, to push your community centre along. There's a lot going on. From round to round, there's definitely going to be more buildings that are going to be favourable to move than others. So if you do have to pay more bricks than wheat, you know that you're going to have to go really brick heavy on that round in order to gain lots of bricks to move that building, whereas you might want to hold off on the wheat production because you're not going to need to use it if you're only using like one resource at a time to move that building across. It's a really multi-layered strategy puzzle here. On top of that as well, the next thing that I really enjoyed about this game is the card play. There are a lot of cards in this game, and that just makes the game feel really fresh and interesting each and every time you play. You are going to be playing a different game every single time you pick it up, and you have the ability to play these cards at any time on your turn or on any player's turn. As long as you're not interrupting an action midway, you can play it at any time. And you may have immediate bonuses that you can get. You may have round to round bonuses that you can get. You may have to trade in goods to get points at the end of the game. They're very diverse in the way that they are presented. You can gain more during the game, and I just love the flexibility that gives you. You never feel too restricted to your strategy. You always feel like there's something positive and really good to do. You always feel like you're going to achieve something. Funnily enough though, even though the card play is one of the strongest things in this game that I really love, I do also feel like it can be seen as a negative, because especially in some of the games that I played this time around, I really tried to go card heavy. And it felt very chaotic towards the end of the game. Some of the cards that you can play activate every round. So in round 3, you may gain a resource, but if you've got 5 different cards that you have already played, you're getting a sheep and you're getting a wheat and you're getting a brick and you're getting this and you're getting that, and like, oh, now I can play this card from my hand to get this, and I've traded this in for that. It can feel quite long-winded. You can sort of take yourself out of the game a little bit, and you have to sort of check yourself to be a bit like, oh, where am I in my turn? What stage was I at? There's so much card play here that it can become very chaotic. Not only that, it takes up a lot of table space, but even though it really sort of pushes replayability and really enhances your strategy and is a lot of fun, it is a lot to sort of keep on top of. But that's pretty much, I think, the only negative for me to say about this game. Talking about the community center a little bit more, this game is essentially like a bit of a race to try and get as many resources and variety of resources going as possible to allow you to push all of these community center buildings along, to get your community center far, far along so you can get more resources, workers and points. It's a race game. And the tension that this game builds is quite good. You definitely feel that sometimes if you haven't managed to push the building once or twice, you can feel a real like, oh, I'm really a little bit behind now, and you need to get that boost going. There's even an action space in this game which allows you to push back one of the little buildings next to your community center, but you gain a wild resource, which is jewelry, and the jewelry can be used as like a free go to like push any building along one, no matter what resources it needs. You could just push a building. And I love that. I love this game so much. I just absolutely love the balance of, and that panic of like, oh god, I need some more brick. How can I get brick? Okay, I can get brick by playing this card, and let's push all those buildings up. Darn, I don't have enough tools. And it's okay, I can just push this building back, and it's great. So many different strategies you can employ here, and so much replayability in terms of the cards that are coming out to make this a really, really interesting title. It feels so unique as well compared to a lot of his other farming ones. It's just not typical farming. You definitely have the aspect of farming your crops on your tiny little fields that you have in front of you, and you've got your sheep that tick along. They do age. I don't like the fact that they can die, but you can save them. It's okay. You can bring them into your little pasture area. This game is just spot on. It's generally just a friendly game as well, because you're just not blocking any players. You're not blocking yourself from round to round. You can definitely feel that tension going by. The cost is going higher. I love that action spot, and I need to go to that action spot, but it's really expensive now. But there's other things that you can usually do to get the resources. So overall, this is a really fantastic game, and from a solo perspective, it's a really, really great title. And to top it all off, it can be found at a usually bargain price. So I'm not sure what people are not sort of grasping about this game. I think it's fabulous. So if you have been following along, you will know what my favourite game is by now. But otherwise, my solo favourite Uwe Rosenberg game is At the Gates of Loyang. And I'm really, really sorry to put this so high on my list, because it's out of print and you can't really get it anymore. But I will say that I have a German copy. I don't speak German, but it is not too bad to try and print off some stuff in your own language and implement that in your gameplay. So do not be put off by getting a copy that is not in your native tongue. Absolutely grab it if you can find one at a reasonable price and you're interested in the theme, because it's a fabulous one. So this is a completely different game to any of the others that I have spoken about today. It is about farming, but it is just vegetables and it's not a worker placement game either. The best way that I can describe this one, I think it's a vegetable trading simulator game. So you are going to be focusing on purchasing seeds, planting these crops, harvesting these crops, and gaining customers and serving these customers and managing their expectations and earning money. And this money is going to be super crucial because you are purchasing your victory points using this money. It is a really, really tight game where overall your victory points are only going to be maximum of around 20 points. So you're not going to be scoring in the multi-hundreds. I think my best score has been 18, and that was a bit of an anomaly. They say a very good score is 17 in this game. And so it is an extremely, extremely tight and tight-knit strategy game. It's money management and card play heavy. The game basically works by you... in the solo mode, it actually plays quite different in the solo mode. In the solo mode, you have a table of cards. I think it's 4x4 So 4 rows of 4. And you get unlimited actions on your turn, and you have the ability on your turn to purchase up to 2 of these cards. And some they have, according to what row they're in, they have a different price. So these cards may be like trading posts, so allow you to trade 1 vegetable for another, or 2 vegetables for a really valuable vegetable. They might be one-time customers, so just, you know, tourists coming in wanting to buy a couple of vegetables and give you money. They might be routine or regular customers who you have a reputation to uphold with them, or they may be helpers, and you'll be able to play them on your turn for a one-time ability. So they're the cards that you're going to be purchasing. And then in your round, you have an unlimited number of actions that you can do. It's such a strange game such a strange thing to say. I can't think of another game where you have unlimited actions. The only thing that's restricting you is the resources that you have with you. So if you don't have enough money to do things, you're going to have to stop the round at that point. If you don't have enough vegetables to trade or sell, you're going to be stopping at that point. So on your turn, you are going to be focusing on gaining more customers that you know that you have a good opportunity to sell to at a later point. You are going to be planting crops in order to have a harvest from round to round. You're going to be focusing on selling really valuable crops to the market to just get an extra coin or two to allow you to buy a less valuable crop to plant, so you have a better supply later in the game. Although there's not that many things to actually physically do in this game has such a tight focus on its overall theme and strategy here that it just feels so... it's a gameplay like no other, really. It feels so much like a simulator where you are just squeezing everything. You feel like a business owner. You are squeezing everything out of everything you've got. At the end of the round, once you've finished trading, buying, planting, selling, whatever you're doing, you have the opportunity to purchase victory points, and you can purchase 1 victory point for 1 coin. Then you could just move up the track. But then any other victory points after that are valued at the point value at which you're going to be moving to. So for example, if I'm on spot number 4 and I want to move up to spot number 5 on the victory point track, it's going to cost me 5 coins. And obviously as the game goes on and you're trying to push up to the 17th spot for a good score, a very good score, it's going to cost you 17 coins. And that's expensive. I really, really love the balance of this game and the agonizing turns that you have. These customers have a reputation that you need to uphold with. So if you take a regular customer and they want an onion and a wheat every single round, you don't have time to even think about whether or not you can really serve them before they start bad-mouthing you, basically. So if you cannot serve them on a round, you have to pay them off. And I absolutely love that sort of agonizing decision that you have to make about who you take, when you take them, if you then take other customers, because that's going to take business away from them, if you can afford to pay them off. There's also an interesting thing in this game about whether or not, or what balance you have between your regular customers and your one-time customers. If you have more regular customers, you get more money from your overall orders from your one-time customers, because I think the idea is that the regulars are probably thematically giving you a good rep, you know? Just ultimately, every aspect of this game feels like it's been so carefully thought out into how the theme can be brought into every layer of the game and every aspect. I think it's so well done. You know, vegetable farming, when you are speaking to a new player, it's like, oh, what's this game about? Oh, it's about farming vegetables. I mean, that doesn't sound the most exciting, does it? But this game has a way of capturing that theme and really pulling it into every single aspect of this gameplay here, and it's creating such a tight gameplay experience that feels so sort of tension filled. I think it's fabulous. And from game to game, you're only going to be seeing differences of maybe 1, 2, 3 victory points, but instead of sort of feeling really super punishing and sort of dampening your spirits, this game has a way of sort of drawing you in and just sort of encouraging you to try just one more time. Just seeing if you can eke out that 1 extra victory point from this game somehow. What can I do to just get that going a little bit further? I also absolutely love the fact that you are not really restricted by anything in this game, by like your number of workers or anything. You have just the agonizing decision about whether or not you want to save your money to buy victory points, or whether you want to save that money to buy vegetables from the market so you can plant them and invest in your future potential as a vegetable farmer. And yeah, I absolutely don't have anything negative to say about At the Gates of Loyang, only the thing that I mentioned at the very beginning, in that it hasn't been reprinted as far as I know, so it's very tricky to get hold of. But I would say that if you are interested in this game, I think it's a fabulous solo game. I don't know how I would feel about it at 3 or 4 players. I very much enjoyed it 2-player. The card drafting mechanic is quite different in a multiplayer game. In fact, I can't even remember how it plays, but it takes a little while to get used to. But I do prefer it in the solo mode. But I think the 3 to 4 player game would feel a little bit more... there's a lot of downtime, I would have thought, and very much multiplayer solitaire in a way. But if you are interested in this game, just absolutely keep an eye out at every opportunity, like eBay and your local stores, and maybe ask around. And I only managed to get my copy by like asking on groups about whether or not anyone had a copy, and somebody did reply to me that they had a German copy that they could sell me. Absolutely worth it. In terms of if you are looking at an international copy, or a copy that's not in your own tongue, you will need to print out or have a copy of the rules in your own language. But also the cards in this game do have some text on them, so only the helper cards have text on them. That's the only aspect of the game that does have text on. So you will need to print off, I think it will be like 2, 3 or 4 A4 pages of cards. And I've laminated them, and every time I just draw a helper card, I just find that helper card in my own language and pop it on the top so I can see what their ability is. Other than that, it's a very language independent game. So definitely don't let that put you off this fantastic game. So there we are. Thank you so much for sticking with me for this list. I know it's a very long video. I've tried to keep it succinct, but I do gabble on when I get excited about some games. But for the whole solo Uwe Rosenberg series in general, I know it's taken me about 18 months or so to put this all together, but I did definitely want to just take my time with it. A lot of his themes can feel very samey. It's very farming heavy and worker placement heavy, so playing a lot of them back to back isn't necessarily the best thing. I did definitely want to break it up with other titles, and I feel like I have now got a very good understanding of what I want to look for in terms of a game from him. But anyway, that is my definitive list so far of where I fall in terms of his solo modes and his games. And as I said at the very beginning, do let me know in the comments and let everyone else know what your solo favourite Uwe Rosenberg games are, because I know there's so many other titles out there and so many other great solo games, and these are just the ones that I have focused on and found and have very much enjoyed so far. But anyway, we're going to wrap that one up there. So thank you so much for watching today, and I will see you on the next video. Bye bye.